All right, welcome to part 3 of our technology reflection, and I'm going to get started just by sharing my screen here. All right. So if I take a look at the last 10 weeks and what I've really taken from this experience, I feel as though the timing of this course was very serendipitously placed. It really allowed me to test out the applications directly in my context and reflect on what went well and what didn't go well and what was overwhelming, and really to connect with everybody in this course and really just kind of come together. And I feel like it was so valuable in that way. And so if I look at the different ideas that I'm going to take with me, I really feel like it's provided me with an expanding toolkit that I'm only just beginning to use. I feel like I've just touched the surface, and I feel like I know more now about what I don't know and what I want to learn about. So I've also really learned about the value of social constructivism and how my own understanding has been really conceptualized with the learning with my students, as well as my colleagues and my classmates. And I've had to kind of take a step back and learn from my own children, as well as my own students, and what they have taught me. And so I look at things like Zoom, I knew nothing about before this. Flipgrid, I've used in my own context as well as in this course. Google Classroom, I feel like I knew a little bit, but now it's just, I know so much more, and how I want to use it in the future. And then another thing that I've learned about is this idea of SIMBI, which I did my last assignment on, that I'm really going to be jumping into in my school. And it's allowed me to explore that, as well as that's what I'm going to be focusing on for my capstone project moving forward. So I feel like it's refined those ideas for me. And that's jumped into those theoretical concepts and the growth in my mindset as well. I feel like my sense of empathy for people with different abilities in terms of technology has really grown, as well as my patience. Because before, I think I just got frustrated with different abilities because I found technology use quite easy. But now it's forced me to step back and say, you know what, I need to go back to the person who needs the most help around me, and grow my own patience. Also, I think that moving forward is the idea of the TPAC process and method of looking at something and really connecting it to pedagogy when you're planning technology. And that whole process with this last assignment has allowed me to kind of get a broader perspective on when I'm actually designing curriculum or even implementing a new technology like SIMBI in this last assignment. So if I move on to my next one here. So the community, I kind of talked about this before, but in terms of building external capacity, I feel like the connections that I've made in this course have expanded my own external capacity, and I'm part of more groups on Twitter and different blogs that have provided me with more to consider in my own classroom, my own context. And I've also begun to share these a lot more with my own school community, and am engaging in more discussions about pedagogy and even just the changes that are going to be happening over the next few years. So if I look at my students as well, they've shocked me in so many ways, as well as a parent. And with what they're able to do at such a young age, my daughter who is 5, and what she has taught me throughout this process. I've also had a hard time separating this course when I've been doing this reflection from the whole remote crisis learning that happened with COVID and this course, because they have been so intertwined. And I think that's why it's been so valuable, but it's also been very challenging at the same time. So there was one quote that that really stood out to me in doing this reflection by Levin and Schrum. who say that supportive leaders must ensure that teachers have ongoing, high quality, differentiated professional development, and they must nurture school culture so teachers and students are learning from one another and working toward the same goal, engaging students in solving relevant problems. So I think the idea that we are all learning together and making sure that we are meeting people where they're at with their professional development, with their own learning from students, with our colleagues, I think that that is so, so important. And that quote really solidified everything for me. I also know that the readings, the experiences through this whole pandemic, they've highlighted the importance of strong leadership and the focus on relationships and the idea of collective efficacy and moving towards the same goal. It really put everything into words with how my feelings kind of came together. Next, or I guess the last thing is the challenges or successes and challenges that I've had. I've talked a lot about the successes and the connection and collaboration with everybody that I think I've really valued from this experience, and the idea of meeting people where they're at, whether that be, you know, colleagues, students, or even myself, in reflecting what I can do and where I want to go. But the challenge for me has definitely been workload, because the challenge balancing my life as a parent, as a teacher of my kids at home, I feel like I have had to have that sense of empathy of the parents of the students that I teach. And it's given me a completely different perspective for where they're coming from. And it has been the most challenging few months, I think, of my entire life. And all of the things that I've learned, I feel like I'm going to have to go back to it to process a little bit more, because I don't think that I've absorbed a lot, but I still am processing, because essentially the trauma of everything that we've gone through. And so I look forward to looking back on this to see in a couple months where I am at and where I'm going to move forward from there. So that's me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, like the concept of how much we're actually able to take in right now with COVID and with all the changes in our workplaces and our personal lives. And I'll share my screen now. It's like a lot of my themes are quite similar to yours, Anna. And I actually look forward to having some time to look back on this course, because I think there's a lot that I've missed in just trying to get through all the info. And so, yeah, I'm just going to kind of go through my reflection in what we are looking at here. So in my context, this last 10 weeks have felt like a complete blur, because I feel like there's a lot of things that at the start of the course, I work with like really young kids. I work with autism. Like technology is not really the forefront of our practice. Our kids are young. We don't want to have them on screens all the time. But there's so many other pedagogical concepts that can be wrapped in using technology that can help me to support our staff to expand more. I wasn't teaching during this time. I was supporting a team of teachers. So it was definitely an interesting shift for me as well. But I really liked the concept of the flipped classroom, because I feel like a lot of our kids with special needs, they're really motivated by like a project-based learning and trying to squeeze in how do we get them all the information they need to create and build and get really hands-on with activities. But with a flipped classroom, you can give them so much access without using that class instructional time to just feed them information, when in this day and age, they're really getting that from technology. They can access so much on their own. And I think I learned a lot about how leaders need to consider the teacher's need for support. Like you were saying, I like meet them where they're at, especially when you're looking at anything that's like a systematic implementation. I've just had a lot of reflections on how like we don't differentiate a lot of our professional development. It's here's something and all of you are going to it, but not all of our teachers are interested in the same things, and not all of our teachers are accessing the same technology in their classrooms. And so I think looking ahead to next year, kind of being proactive in that concept of what do we actually need to learn, and what do the teachers want more information in to be able to build their professional development. I think you mentioned TPAC, and I also really connected with that model. I used it in my last assignment as well, because I just feel like it's really important to really think about all of those content areas, all of those knowledge bases that a teacher needs, and really be able to look at, okay, what are we doing well and how are we building these areas and what areas we need to focus in more on to help with implementation, especially with COVID. Because I have a feeling, we haven't actually got our plans yet, but I assume we'll be having some e-learning components for the upcoming year still. So there were a couple of articles that I really connect with within this 10 weeks. And I think one of them was the Anderson article, because it really talked about TPAC in special education. So it was kind of right on target for me, and really thinking about making sure that you're not just picking a technology for one kid and thinking about how can I use that technology across my classroom, and what other diverse learning needs can I target with that kind of curricular concepts, and using it in a more universal way, which is what I focused on for my last paper. And the McKnight article also had lots of relevant info on how do we use technology more systematically to help our students become creators of their knowledge rather than just consumers. So kind of back to that classroom concept too. So when I think about my community, my colleagues, I think that I learned a lot as a program coordinator that I need to kind of think about what supports our teachers need next year. I think this was such a quick shift to online learning, and you kind of just think, oh, well, teachers build curriculum all the time, they build lesson plans all the time, but this is just such a different and unprecedented way to teach. And I think it's been nice to hear from our colleagues in this course about what they've been struggling with or what's been working well for them, and like having all of the different learning bites where we're learning about different blogs you can go to, or different Twitter accounts that might be helpful to gather some of this information. So I think it's important that we sort of prioritize getting that information to our staff and really thinking about how to build their professional development and be proactive in the upcoming school year, with knowing that we're probably going to still have some of those components. And then for my students, I think I focused my last paper on peer-mediated implementation. So thinking about how the peers can actually support a child's ability to learn new technology by modeling it and doing it beside them, and peer-to-peer teaching and peer mentoring and coaching. So I think that that's something that I want to take and learn a bit more about for our students in the upcoming year. And then when I think about kind of the strengths and challenge or successes and challenges, I kind of had the same thought as you, Anna, in around that this course was so interesting and the content was so timely, but I did really struggle to stay engaged with it all and kind of take it all in. And I can't wait to sort of take some more time to look through it, because I think that technology, when like what I think about it is often about like assistive technology or AAC or something so specific for one child, but thinking about other ways that we can incorporate technology, because a lot of our kids are really engaged with it. Like a lot of our kids love to be on their iPads or to be learning through some sort of different tech. So it's kind of interesting to think about like all this room for growth that there still is. I think that I struggled with just, course engagement and having that like authentic learning experience, because I was just trying to stay caught up. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to think about where we can continue to grow as a staff, and the TPAC specifically was something that really helped me feel like, okay, I can really break down what our staff are already accessing and what they need more access to. So I think that that's been really helpful for me in kind of moving forward. So I look forward to kind of continuing to access this information in the next few, I don't know, weeks, months, years. That's it for me.
Right. I find this like going through yours and going last is kind of interesting, because I do feel like the three of us are super similar in what we took, which is unsurprising, I think. So I'll share mine. And this is what, you know, my technology reflection looked like as a result of my specific context. And I think there's definitely this shared, you know, historical context that we're definitely finding. I think our educational contexts have never really been similar. Like we have been similar, but our situations never have. And I think this time really put us in more of a similar situation than we have been in the past. And that's what we're finding, that our paths and our theories and our ideas are kind of parallel. 10 weeks later, I think I've always been a teacher that, you know, I'm going to adopt something, I'm going to try it. And if it fails miserably, I'm okay with it and I'll throw it away. And I don't feel connected to it at all, like an application or extension. And so it was, for me, I think when I played around with tech, it was always like trial and error and play. it was never really grounded in theoretical concepts. And so taking this course now and kind of pausing and being like, well, why do I think the one-to-one Chromebooks was such a good idea? Why do I think e-portfolios are great? Why are breakout rooms important? Now I can kind of be like, well, the Chromebooks were important because it gave everybody power, right? And put everybody in a level playing field. The e-portfolios were constructivist. The breakout rooms were, you know, a way for kids to feel connected in a virtual, you know, socially isolated world. And so instead of just selling it to teachers being like, trust me, I know what I'm talking about, this works, I could kind of ground it in like what it is and why I need to use it, and then use TPAC to kind of show them it's not just coming from me. I'm not the expert. I'm just listening to somebody that has it and has used it and has researched it for you know, their career and their academic life. And so I think now I'm feeling more confident. I'm not grounding my ideas in relationships as much anymore. I'm kind of fusing those relationships with theory. And I think that's where I am sort of at this point in the course. With my community, I'm part of this e-learning team that's planning and trying to prepare our staff as a whole for blended learning, or what September is going to look like. We never really know, and that is kind of tackled in my paper. But throughout the course and throughout COVID, I found that I was really struggling with, you know, my individual, I just want to move fast and I'll just go. And it really struck me how sometimes like we would just find ourselves in molasses a little bit, right? Like there's a group of staff members and teachers that really need to flesh it out and try it out in an experiment. And being a part of an e-learning team where like we're all technologically savvy, we're all on Twitter, we're all, you know, passionate about pedagogy and technology, it frustrated us individually to be faced with contrary ideas, I guess. And so in a world where like things had to move fast, right, and we had to adapt, being stuck in that molasses part was really frustrating. And so we now have to pivot as a team and be like, well, where is that coming from? How can they be useful? How can these resistors help us form policies and form ideas that will be useful for the school to improve as a whole? And I think instead of seeing it as butting heads, we kind of need to take that, right, and say, well, why is our way of seeing and teaching the right way? It's not. We just happen to be the ones that want to move. And sometimes being stuck in molasses kind of gives you that time to pause, right? Like you guys were referring to, it is really nice to just sit around and kind of look at your surroundings and just be present in what's going well, what's not going well, and how to prepare. So I think that's where I've learned from my colleagues, because as an individual, I just embrace technology, and that can be really harmful as well. For my students, I think next year I'm teaching English 12, which is a new course for me. So not only am I teaching with new content, I'm teaching in an unknown environment. And I think to be able to take risks and to get feedback from my students is going to be really important going forward, especially in a new course, because they know what they want, right? Our kids know what they want from this experience. And so to say, oh, here's what I think is best, and not listening to what they're going to learn from or the methods that they need to grow, I think would be a bit selfish. So that's where I'm at with my students. I think the other thing I'm kind of scared of is just how much time my school is putting into instruction and assessment, but we're not really talking about the social part of it. We're not talking about the personal part of it. We're not talking about like how many times in high school the girls kind of sneak away to the bathroom and feel like a community and feel like they can chat and talk and release steam, and those between the bells moments that are like not in the brick and mortar classroom are so important. So how do we build that into blended learning, into online learning? Because sometimes I feel like kids learn more from those interactions and take those lessons into actual life than what we're actually instructing them or hired, you know, quote, hired to do. So I think as like the director of student life position and really being in charge of extracurricular, I felt like my job was kind of up for grabs, because what extracurriculars are we going to have next year? And that's where I'm feeling a little bit like I need to make it an effort to focus on the social, to focus on the personal aspect of our community members. Successes and challenges. I think, like I was saying in my first slide, I have good relationships with teachers on staff. And so when I sold things to them, it was like because they trusted me, right? Not because I was selling it to them as a research-based, this is TPAC, it's great, it fuses technology with content, with pedagogy, but it was more so, oh, I trust that you're not selling me something that I'm not going to use. Whereas now I can ground it in a theory. I can ground it in what is considered best practice. And the aspect of being a learning leader in that Christensen article, where you have to motivate, communicate, and facilitate, I always found that I was focusing on the motivate and the communicate part. And if you weren't willing to be a part of the facilitation and the development part, I was just gonna leave you, because you weren't ready to move forward with us. But now I think I'm focusing on that. And the challenges were definitely the burnout. And I think kind of what you two were saying was that it was so hard to move so quickly and be so engaged with our work that this part kind of fell a little bit to the side, and you wanted to be engaged because you knew it was going to be useful, but there was this present emergency that you needed, this fire that you needed to put out now. And the other thing I found was when I did dive into the course, it was mostly because I was frustrated with my school. So the course became kind of a weird confirmation bias, right? That this was best practice because there were so many resistors in my school. And I would hide in the course and be like, but see, I know what I'm talking about. And then I would go back into school and it would be this weird loop. So I think that's where I'm still finding a little bit of challenge is where do our attitudes, where can we balance those attitudes, right? And I guess to end and to kind of transition to a discussion is, I forgot about parents, like looking at the slide and thinking about Anna and thinking about, that community. I focused on teachers and students a lot, but where do the parents fit in? Because, parents were really struggling with the virtual part of it, and they didn't know anything about technology either. So I guess my question is how best can we support them going forward too?
It's really interesting hearing both of you talk and just kind of reflecting on this entire course, because we have been used to, we're still fairly early on in our careers, but we've had some time working with different types of people, and we've learned from other people. We have kind of established how we work in the classroom or in our scenarios. And all of a sudden, everything has just been completely turned upside down. And we are now in the learning seat. Mm-hmm. So the idea, I don't think I've ever come across the idea of differentiated PD.
Right.
Right? Like, I think I've thought about it, but I haven't purposely really looked into it. And mm-hmm. So it makes sense. Why not teach teachers in a differentiated way, the way we do it normally in a classroom? Mm-hmm. And so this whole thing has brought up this idea that we're now all learning. And like you said, Cassie, these parents are all learning now. So we're all being put into a totally different seat. And how are we dealing with that? And how are we supporting everyone along the way? So I just find it fascinating.
And I really like what you said, Anna, about how we kind of started in 3 different contexts, and now we're back together kind of on a level playing field. We have all this sort of content knowledge now and a vocabulary that we're sharing. It's been interesting to do these 3 reflections together, because I think our learnings have kind of come together. We sort of supported each other through this course. So it's nice and kind of serendipitous to come together at the end and say, hey, this is kind of what we pulled together, and our presentations were quite similar. And I think that really speaks to how well this course was organized and how we were able to take the information in and really use it, even though we were in a bit of a crisis or in a bit of a panic state.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, right, I'm always trying to link it back to community and where you can learn from. And I think I'm so in dire need always of trying to ingest information from people that are different than me and that are having different experiences, because I just know that that's the best way for me to learn, right? And I think being able to have that online community and then having my colleagues in an online community and then kind of fusing it, it was always that I saw my colleagues face to face, and this community, like the MALM community, was online. And so all of a sudden you're kind of fusing those interactions and fusing those ideas and lessons, and you're almost, I think we were almost learning from interactions that we were having online, even though we weren't, you know, conscious of it, right? Oh, but this is what a discussion forum looks like because we did it for, you know, 560 or 550. Oh, this is what papers should look like, or group papers should look like, because this is what our online courses were. I think especially for high school, a lot of what I was suggesting came from these courses, mainly because it was working for me, right? So, yeah.
A lot of the lines were blurred, but in a really good way, right?
Yeah.
That's what we learned from, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Okay, well,
thank you guys.
signing off.